Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question's to the Prime Minister. Does he agree with all recent statements by his Minister of Finance? If so, why?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I'm not aware of all of the Minister's recent statements. However, I do agree with his statement that, quote, it is important to rebalance the economy because of the damage done by the mismanagement of the previous government, which left behind an economy where the tradable sector had shrunk by 15%.
The Honourable Annette.
Mr Speaker, does he agree with the Minister of Finance, who said the gap between the rich and the poor in New Zealand is about the same after this budget? If so, was it his intention, after 18 months as Prime Minister, not to honour his commitment to tackle the problem faced by the underclass, as he has described some New Zealanders, the people he said were his priority when he was in opposition?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I'd remind the member that the Minister of Finance went on to talk about the real changes the budget had delivered for narrowing the gap between those who are rich and those who are poor, and that included better incentives for people in the tax system, better incentives and ability for people to own homes, better incentives for people to be able to save, and the 170,000 jobs that were generated in the economy. And I would say, Mr Speaker, it's refreshing, I think, to have a government in office that wants to narrow the gap between the rich and the poor by making the poor wealthier, as opposed to the last 9 years where the only policy was to make the rich poorer.
The Honourable Annette.
Question, Mr Speaker. Did the Minister of Finance make it clear to him? Did the Minister of Finance make it clear to him that the calculator, which he claims confirms that virtually all New Zealanders will be better off, fails to tell people that as a result of the same budget, they will face a raft of additional costs, including increase in their rents of up to $20 a week, interest rate hikes, at least $5 a week on their power bills, increase in their doctors' bills, increase in their phone bills, an increase on all their food items, an increase in their rates, just to name some? And will the public who used this calculator...
Order.
And will the public who used this calculator think he was being straight up with them when they find the costs that they're going to face?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, there was so much wrong with that question, I'm not quite sure where to start. But let's just take a few points with it. Interest rates, far higher under a Labor government than they have been in the term the Nationals been in office. Electricity rose, I think it was 70 or 80% in the 9 years that they were in office. Rents, Mr Speaker, on average have increased double under a Labor government as expected under this government. Mr Speaker, if any New Zealander goes to taxguides.govt.nz, they'll find that the vast bulk of them are financially better off under a national government.
The Honourable Annette King. Order.
Point of order, Mr Speaker.
Point of order, the Honourable Annette.
I know you were listening very carefully to my question and know that my question related
Order. A point of order has been called.
My question related to the calculator and whether they had told New Zealanders about the other cost increases. The Prime Minister answered about what a Labor government did, and what we wanted to hear was his comments about their own policy, not the previous government's.
I can understand the member's concern, but I do invite her to go back to the question she asked. And the member included in her question a number of statements about how she saw costs might go in the future. And where a member puts, strictly, standing orders don't actually permit a range of statements like that be put into a question. But I don't want to prevent members from doing that. But where members do that, they do invite the Minister answering it to dispute those statements. And that's exactly what the Prime Minister did. He disputed that range of statements. And I can't prevent ministers from doing that. I think he answered the question in a reasonable way. The Honourable Annette King.
Point of order, Mr.
Point of order.
You might recall yesterday I attempted to lodge in the House, on the table in the House, from the property investors, the increase in rents that they said would take place following this budget, and the National Party denied me putting that on the table. So I was able to show, and I can show, where these facts and figures come from.
Order that it doesn't assist with the situation. I mean, the House is at liberty to permit a member to table a document or not. That is not the Speaker's decision. That is the decision of the House, and yesterday the House, for whatever reasons, chose not to do that. But regardless of how much the member believes the statements in a question might be correct, a minister is at liberty to dispute them, and the minister did dispute them and disputed them pretty robustly, and I don't believe I can stop him from doing that. The Honourable Annette King.
Supplementary question, Mr Speaker. Did he know the Minister of Finance was going to raise the issue of asset sales, in particular the sale of Kiwi Bank, the day after the budget? If so, why did he allow the Minister to bring up such a controversial issue, which New Zealanders have rejected for the past 7 elections, unless it's part of a process to soften up Kiwis for the next round of asset sales?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I'd remind the member that the Minister of Finance is a Minister of the Crown, not a toddler. I don't force him to ask me what questions he's allowed to answer in public. And if he gets asked a question, I expect him to answer it.
The question,
The
Mr.
Honourable
Speaker.
Annette King.
Did the Minister of Finance advise him that the Secretary of the Treasury was going to appear on television last Sunday and would be saying increasing GST to 15%, quote, was a first step, end quote? And has his minister briefed him on the work that Treasury's doing on increasing GST even further?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, in relation to the first question, yes, I was aware that John Whitehead was going on Q&A. In relation to the last question, I'm not aware of any work increasing GST, and that's because it won't be going up further from 15%.
The Honourable Annette King. Order. I've called the member's colleague, the Honourable Annette King.
Supplementary question, Mr Speaker.
Order. Order. I say to both front benches, please, I've called the Honourable Annette King.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Was Bill English correct when he said John Key just bounces from one cloud to another? And does that account for the international media reporting his antics in the odd spots of the newspaper, including his comments about being eaten by tuhoi, his vasectomy, and his stand-up routine on the Letterman show, and his waterbed policy?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, yes, I'm sure the Minister of Finance was right. He was also right when he said to me yesterday, gosh, Annette King's struggling as much as her leader is.
Question number 3, Te Roro Flavel. Order. 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 I've called Te Roro Flavel.
Point of order. Point of order, Mr Speaker.
Oh, point of order, Te Roro Flavel.
E paku pātai ki a koe, mō ngā kaua mō tēnei rangi tunu nei, engari mō ngā rā kai mū te aro, mō ngā pātai ko tuhia i te reo Māori, me pānui te kai tuku pātai i te reo Māori me te reo Pākehā, me waiho te reo Pākehā rānei.
Order. It is a good point, and I say to the Honourable Te Roro Flavel, I regret probably having to confess that I believe it is helpful to members to provide both the Māori and the English, even when the question is in Māori. I say I regret it because if we were bilingual as a people, the member wouldn't have to do that, but I believe it does assist members in understanding the question where the English version is, the translation is provided as well, and it's not the member's fault. I accept that many of us are not as lingual or bilingual as the Honourable Member is himself. Te Roro Flavel.
Kia ora, Mr Speaker. Talofa lava, malo le soifua. Kia ora tātai. Ko taku pātai he pātai ki te minite mō ngā take mā tauranga. He aha ngā pūrongo me nā rā ko whiwhi i aia ki te whakahe i tā te amorangi o te kura Māori o te whare wānanga o Victoria, Peter Ads, I kōrero nei, kei te taumaha te noho tahi o te iwi, nā te mea kei te he te aronga o te hītori, e whakaakongia nei I roa kura, hei tāna hoki kāre te whakatikatika o te marautanga I nā tata nei I